Have you ever walked into a room and felt, before a single word was spoken, that something had been taken from you? Not your wallet, not your keys, your dignity. Imagine coming home after one of the longest days of your life. Your feet ache. Your mind is exhausted. You just want to sit down, breathe, and feel safe inside the walls of your own home. Now imagine walking through that door and finding a stranger sitting in your living room. A woman you have never seen before, confident, comfortable, completely at ease. As if she belongs there. And before you can even find the words to ask who she is or why she's there, your husband turns to you. Calmly. Casually. As if what he's about to say is the most reasonable thing in the world. "Vickie, could you stand up so Paris can sit?" That's exactly what happened to Vickie. In her own home. In front of the man she had built her life with. No one moved. No one spoke. The air in the room turned to ice. And what Sam didn't know, what neither of them could have predicted, was that Vickie was about to respond in a way that would leave them both completely speechless. Because sometimes, the quietest people carry the most devastating answers. If you believe that no one, no matter how long they've been together, should ever be disrespected by someone who claimed to love them, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the Story Room. Because the quietest people always have the most powerful stories. Vickie was the kind of woman people described as unshakable. Not cold. Not distant. Just steady, the way a deep river is steady. Calm on the surface, with a current underneath that most people never got close enough to feel. She was 37, a secondary school administrator who spent her days managing everything from student conflict to staff scheduling without ever raising her voice. She was precise. Measured. The kind of person who thought before she spoke and meant every word when she finally did. At home, she brought that same quiet energy. She cooked on weekends because she genuinely enjoyed it, not out of obligation. She kept their home orderly and warm. She remembered the small things. Sam's coffee strong with no sugar, the particular way he liked his shirts folded, the anniversary of his mother's passing, on which she always left flowers on the kitchen table without being asked. She loved her husband in the language of consistency. Sam, on the surface, seemed to have everything a man could want. He was successful, a regional sales manager for a logistics company, well-dressed, well-spoken, charming in social settings. He had married Vickie 8 years ago, in a ceremony his own mother called the most beautiful she'd ever attended. He knew how to say the right things at the right times. He was, by most external measurements, a good husband. But slowly, quietly, in the way that erosion happens, grain by grain until one day the whole bank gives way, things had begun to change. It started with his phone. Sam had always been someone who left his phone face up on the kitchen counter, unlocked and unremarkable. Then, around 18 months ago, it started going face down. Always. Without explanation. Without being asked about it. Vickie noticed. She said nothing. Then came the late evenings at work. 1 or 2 a week, then 3, then whole stretches of the week where he arrived home after she was already in bed. He was always apologetic. Always plausible. There were deadlines. There were client dinners. There was a major tender coming up that needed everything he had. She told herself it was stress. Then the warmth left his voice. Not dramatically, not all at once. But in the small daily exchanges that hold a marriage together, something had quietly withdrawn. He stopped asking about her day. He stopped reaching for her hand in the car. He responded to her stories with the polite half-attention of a man whose mind was somewhere else entirely. Vickie sat with the feeling for months. The feeling that the man across the dinner table from her had, without any announcement, begun to leave. She had no proof. No confrontation. Just the slow accumulation of small wrongnesses she kept storing away, hoping they would eventually add up to nothing. They didn't. The name Paris first entered Vickie's life by accident. She had borrowed Sam's laptop one Thursday evening to print a document, something mundane, something forgettable. And as the browser opened, a tab she hadn't touched loaded with a conversation. Just a flash of it. Just enough. A name. A tone. A familiarity between two people who had no business being that familiar. Vickie closed the tab. She printed her document. She placed the laptop back on the desk exactly as she had found it. And she went to bed. She didn't sleep. Over the following weeks, she began paying attention with a different kind of precision. Not frantic surveillance. Vickie was not built for hysteria. But quiet, careful observation. The kind she used at work when she suspected something was off, but hadn't yet confirmed it. She watched patterns. She noted inconsistencies. She paid attention to the geography of his excuses. Sam came home one Friday evening distracted in a way that felt different from his usual distraction. He showered immediately upon arriving home, before dinner, before sitting down, before saying anything beyond a brief hello. He was on his phone while she cooked. When she set the food on the table, he glanced up and said, "This looks great," in the voice of a man who had not looked at it at all. He slept turned away from her that night. The following week, Vickie came home from work on a Tuesday to find his car already in the driveway. Unusual, since he rarely arrived before 7. She assumed he'd left early. She let herself in through the front door. The living room was occupied. Sitting in the armchair, the larger one, the one closest to the window, the one Vickie had specifically chosen for that room, was a woman she had never seen before. She was perhaps 30, polished, at ease. She was wearing the kind of casual outfit that takes considerable effort to make look effortless. Sam was on the sofa. He looked up when Vickie entered. And in the pause that followed, that fraction of a second, Vickie watched something move across his face. Not guilt. Not panic. Something worse. Calculation. "Vickie, this is Paris. She's a colleague. We had some things to go over." Paris smiled. It was a practiced smile. Vickie looked at them both. "Right," she said, and set her bag down. She had not yet sat. She had not yet had the chance. The room had 2 sofas and 1 armchair. Sam occupied one sofa. Paris occupied the armchair. The second sofa had items from Sam's bag spread across it, papers, his jacket, his laptop case. And Sam, who had watched his wife of 8 years walk through the door after a full day of work, cleared his throat and said the words that no amount of preparation could have softened. "Could you stand for a bit? Paris is comfortable where she is, and there's not really space." He gestured vaguely at the second sofa. He was asking her. In her own home. In the room she had furnished and cleaned and maintained and come home to for 8 years. He was asking her to stand, so his guests could remain seated. The room held its breath. Paris had the grace, or perhaps the awareness, to look slightly uncomfortable for the first time. Her smile flickered. Her eyes moved between Sam and Vickie with the caution of someone who had just realized the ground beneath them was less solid than it appeared. And Vickie stood there, coat still on, bag still in hand. She did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She did not break into tears or accusations. She simply looked at her husband. And she smiled. The smile was not unkind. That was what unnerved Sam most. He had braced, consciously or not, for an explosion. He had prepared himself for tears, or anger, or the kind of sharp marital exchange that could be smoothed over later with apologies and proximity. He knew how to navigate Vickie's distress. He had navigated it before. But this wasn't distress. Vickie set her bag down on the floor beside the door. She removed her coat, slowly, and hung it on the hook. She smoothed the front of her blouse. And then she looked at Sam with an expression he had not seen before, clear and perfectly calm, with something underneath it that he could not quite name. "Of course," she said, and she stayed standing. But she didn't leave the room. She didn't retreat to the kitchen. She didn't make herself small in the way the request had implicitly asked her to. She stood in her own living room, coat off, entirely present, and began to speak. "Sam, I didn't catch your colleague's full name. Paris, is it?" Paris gave a small nod. "And how long have you two been working together?" The question was conversational. Pleasant, even. But in the silence before Sam answered it, Vickie had already begun quietly cataloging every detail of what she was looking at. The familiarity in the way Paris sat, the absence of any actual work materials in the room, the fact that Sam had showered the moment he arrived home. Sam said something vague about a shared project. Vickie nodded. "What department did you say you were in, Paris?" A fractional pause. Paris named one that Vickie recognized as existing within Sam's company. The answer was a little too quick. The kind of quick that meant it had been prepared. The room had grown very still. Sam cleared his throat. "Vickie, we were in the middle of something." "I know," Vickie said simply. And in those two words, in the precise and unhurried way she said them, both Sam and Paris understood simultaneously that Vickie was not talking about a work conversation. Her face remained composed. Her voice remained even. But her eyes had changed. Not with tears. Not with fury. With the absolute and final clarity of a woman who has just received the last piece of information she needed. She had been storing small wrongnesses for 18 months. The face-down phone. The late evenings. The retreating warmth. The laptop tab she had closed without confronting. All of it had lived in her as a question she wasn't quite ready to ask. She was ready now. Her heart was doing something large and complicated inside her chest. But her hands were steady. Her voice was steady. Because Vickie had not survived 37 years, 8 years of marriage, and a career spent managing impossible situations by falling apart in front of people who expected her to. She looked at her husband, this man who had asked her to stand in her own home, and she made a decision so quiet it was almost invisible. She was done waiting. She was done adjusting. She was done carrying the weight of what she knew while pretending she didn't know it. What she did next would be the last thing either of them expected. What would you have done in Vickie's position? Would you have confronted them right then and there, or would you have played it cool the way she did? Tell me in the comments. And have you ever had to smile through something that was breaking you inside? Vickie walked, unhurried, deliberate, to the second sofa. She moved Sam's jacket. She moved his laptop bag. She placed them neatly on the floor beside the coffee table. And then she sat down, crossed her legs, and turned to face her husband with the full, unhurried attention of a woman who had absolutely nowhere else to be. "There," she said. "Now we can all sit." Sam blinked. Paris looked at her hands. "Sam," Vickie continued in the same pleasant register, "I've been very patient. I've been patient for quite a long time. So I'm only going to say this once, and I need you to hear it clearly." The room was so quiet that the refrigerator hum from the kitchen was audible. "I know who Paris is. I don't mean her job title." She let that land. "I know about the phone. I know about the Thursdays. I know about March, when you told me the conference ran long and you had to stay overnight. I know because I am not, and have never been, a woman who can be easily deceived, and the only reason it took me this long is that I was giving you the benefit of a doubt you didn't deserve." Sam opened his mouth. "I haven't finished," Vickie said, without raising her voice by a single fraction. She turned briefly to Paris. I don't blame you the way you might expect me to. You don't owe me loyalty. He does. Or he did. Then she stood. Not rushed. Not dramatic. With the measured grace of a woman who had made up her mind long before this moment arrived, and was only now letting the world catch up. What I need you to understand, Sam, is that the moment you asked me to stand in my own home so that she could sit, you answered every question I'd been too generous to ask. She picked up her bag from beside the door. I'll be staying at my sister's tonight. By the time I return, I expect this house to contain only what is mine. She pulled on her coat. And Paris, I hope the chair was comfortable. She opened the front door. She closed it behind her. Not a slam. Not a statement. Just a door, closing softly on everything that had come before it. Sam sat in the silence she left behind, and for the first time in 18 months, he had absolutely nothing calculated to say. Paris stood quietly, gathered her things, and left without a word. The armchair sat empty. No one wanted it anymore. The weeks that followed were not easy. They rarely are. Vickie stayed at her sister's for 10 days. She didn't cry on the first night. She was surprised by that. She lay in the spare bedroom and stared at the ceiling and felt something she eventually identified as relief, which disturbed her slightly until she understood it. The relief wasn't about leaving Sam. It was about no longer having to pretend she didn't know. She retained a solicitor within the fortnight. She was calm in every meeting. Methodical. She knew what she wanted, and she asked for it plainly. Those who worked with her through the process commented, more than once, on how composed she was. She never seemed angry, her solicitor later recalled. Just resolved. Sam attempted contact several times in the early weeks. He sent messages that moved through the full range: denial, partial admission, justification, apology. Vickie read each one and responded to none until she had spoken to her legal counsel. When she did respond, it was in writing through proper channels. She moved into her own flat 4 months later. Small, bright, with a kitchen she chose entirely for herself. She bought a new armchair. A good one. The kind you choose without consulting anyone else. And every evening when she came home from work and sat in it, she felt something she had almost forgotten the texture of. Peace. Not the muted, managed, careful peace of a woman keeping a household together on behalf of someone who no longer deserved it. Her own peace. Uncomplicated. Entirely hers. Sometimes people will test your silence. They will read your patience as permission. They will interpret your composure as ignorance. They will push, slowly, carefully, gradually, until they find the edge of what you will accept. And they will be entirely unprepared for what happens when you finally stop accepting it. Vickie never raised her voice. She never broke down. She never gave Sam the emotional explosion that would have allowed him to reframe the situation as her overreaction. She simply told the truth in her own time, in her own way, and walked out of the room with more dignity than she walked in with. That is not weakness dressed up as strength. That is strength, the rarest, quietest, most devastating kind. Your composure is not evidence that you didn't care. It is evidence that you cared enough about yourself not to lose yourself in someone who had already lost the right to you. Your value was never theirs to define. Thank you for staying with this story all the way to the end. It means everything to us here at the Story Room. If Vickie's story moved you, if it reminded you of your own strength or someone else's, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Like and subscribe so you never miss a story. And whenever you're ready, the next one is already waiting.